You guys are really a couple of spooksters, aren't you?
There are movies that entertain you, and then there are movies that burrow so deep into your brain that decades later, you still can't hear a Harry Belafonte song without immediately wanting to grab a shrimp cocktail and start dancing against your will. Beetlejuice is that second kind of movie. Released in 1988 by Warner Brothers, directed by the one and only Tim Burton, and starring Michael Keaton in what might be the most committed performance of chaotic energy ever captured on celluloid. Beetlejuice became an instant classic. And yet, for all the times you have watched it, for all the Halloween costumes and the repeated viewings and the quotes you still throw into conversations, there is a mountain of behind-the-scenes madness that most people have never heard. Today, we are counting down 15 genuinely weird, surprising, and fascinating facts about the making of Beetlejuice. From casting decisions that would have changed everything, to script drafts so dark they would make your jaw drop, to one Hollywood star who spent the entire production convinced he was flushing his career down the drain. So settle in, do not say any names 3 times, and let us get into it. Let us start with something that sounds like a joke, but is 100% true. The character whose name is literally the title of the film, the guy whose face is on every poster and every piece of merchandise, does not even appear on screen for the first 25 minutes of the movie. Michael Keaton, playing the self-proclaimed ghost with the most, clocks in at somewhere around 17 minutes of total screen time across a 92-minute film. That is less than 20% of the movie. And here is the thing. Keaton himself wanted it that way. He actively pushed back against the idea of overloading the film with his character, arguing that less was more. He understood instinctively that Beetlejuice works precisely because he feels like a force of nature that erupts into scenes rather than a character who quietly sits in them. Too much of him and the spell breaks. So the man looked at what could have been a star vehicle and deliberately kept himself on the sidelines. There's something almost counterintuitive and deeply impressive about that kind of creative restraint, especially when you consider how electric every single one of those 17 minutes turn out to be. If someone says the word Beetlejuice to most people, they do not immediately quote a line of dialogue. They start humming. The dinner party possession scene, where the Dietz family and their guests are supernaturally hijacked into performing Harry Belafonte's Deo, is arguably the most remembered moment in the entire film. It is joyful and strange and completely unforgettable. But here is what almost happened instead. The original screenplay did not call for Belafonte at all. The scene was scripted to use a 1939 recording by the Ink Spots, which would have been a very different kind of energy. More melancholy lounge act, less explosive Caribbean chaos. It was actually the actors Catherine O'Hara and Jeffrey Jones who pushed for the calypso direction, with Jones specifically remembering Deo from his childhood and pitching it during production. Once that song locked in, the scene transformed into something with real rhythmic power and momentum. The shrimp cocktail claws that grabbed the dinner guests were operated by stagehands crouched under the table, and by at least one account, a miscalculation sent one of those prop claws directly into O'Hara's face mid-take. Art demands sacrifice. The financial side also played a role. Belafonte's music licensing came in cheaper than several other options that were being considered, which means one of the most celebrated sequences in 1980 cinema was partially kept alive by a budget spreadsheet. The scene became so culturally embedded that when actor Glenn Shaddix, who played the unforgettable Otho, passed away in 2022, the Banana Boat song was played as part of his memorial tribute. Before Michael Keaton transformed the role into the decomposing carnival barker we all know and love, Tim Burton had a completely different performer in mind. His original choice for the part was Rat Pack legend Sammy Davis Jr., and this was not a passing thought. Burton was genuinely serious about it. Burton's vision was for Beetlejuice to feel like a twisted, corrupted version of old-school showbiz glamour. Less creature from the swamp and more undead Vegas headliner. He pitched the idea to Warner Brothers, and their reaction reportedly ranged from deeply confused to firmly opposed. The studio could not picture the 63-year-old entertainer as the unhinged supernatural gremlin they had in mind, and the idea never made it out of the conference room. But Davis was far from the only name attached to the role at various points. Reports have linked the character to Robin Williams, Bill Murray, Jack Nicholson, Dudley Moore, Tim Curry, and the volcanic comedian Sam Kinison. In Kinison's case, the story gets particularly strange. According to accounts from that period, his own talent agent never passed the offer along, meaning Kinison potentially missed out on the role entirely due to his own representation. A ghost movie that ghosted its own potential star before filming even started. The Beetlejuice that made it to theaters is quirky, macabre, and darkly funny. It earned a PG rating and families watched it together. The version that existed in the earliest drafts of the script was a completely different animal. Screenwriter Michael McDowell's initial take on the material was straight horror, not a dark comedy with gothic aesthetics. The opening car accident that kills the Maitlands was written in graphic, visceral detail, with none of the gentle handling that the final film employed. The Dietz family in that early draft included a second child, a 9-year-old girl named Kathy, who at one point in the script is attacked by Beetlejuice after he transforms into a rabid squirrel. Let that sentence settle for a moment. A child mauled by a supernatural rabbit squirrel. This was not a film headed toward the family section of the video store. The character's intentions toward Lydia Dietz were also considerably darker in early drafts, carrying undertones that would have been genuinely disturbing rather than absurdly comic. One version of the ending had Beetlejuice transforming into a ball of fire and destroying the entire house in a spectacular explosion. There was no version of a PG rating surviving that finale. Warren Scarron was brought in as a script doctor to reshape the material, and his work essentially rebuilt the tonal foundation of the story. He kept the horror elements, but pushed them firmly into the realm of the absurd and playful. That intervention is the reason the film we know exists at all. What Scarron understood was the critical difference between a monster who is terrifying and a monster who is terrifyingly ridiculous. The second one is a franchise. The first one is just a nightmare. The title Beetlejuice is now one of the most recognizable in cinema history. It is weird, it is slightly difficult to spell, and it sounds like absolutely nothing else, which is exactly why Warner Brothers had serious problems with it during production. Studio executives reportedly felt the name was too strange, too confusing, and too risky for mainstream audiences. Their proposed alternative was House Ghosts. 2 words. Completely generic. A title so bland it would have blended invisibly into the video store shelf alongside every other forgettable supernatural comedy from that era. Tim Burton, never a man who did well with notes that pointed toward the conventional, hated it immediately. During what was apparently a tense meeting on the subject, he sarcastically offered up a counter-suggestion as a way of expressing his frustration. The title was Scared Sheetless, a pun, a bedsheet joke. And the genuinely alarming part of the story is that some of the executives actually responded positively to it. Burton reportedly panicked in the aftermath, realizing that his joke might actually become the title of his movie. The original name survived, and Beetlejuice went on to become exactly the kind of one-of-a-kind marquee title that studios spend millions trying to engineer. House Ghosts would have been forgotten within a year. The afterlife in the finished film has a distinctive visual personality. The waiting room with its numbered tickets and bizarre occupants. The desert planet orbiting Saturn with its lurking sandworms. It is strange but readable. What the film originally contained, however, was something considerably more conceptually ambitious and considerably less successful with actual viewers. In early cuts of the film, when Adam Maitland first crosses over and leaves the house as a ghost, he did not end up anywhere near Saturn. Instead, he walked into an enormous black void filled with massive rotating clockwork gears that crackled with electrical energy. The intended metaphor was that the afterlife was the interior of a giant cosmic watch, reflecting the idea that time operates differently once you have died. It sounded like a compelling visual concept in development. On screen, it completely lost test audiences. People had come to see a haunted house comedy with dark humor and surprising characters. Being suddenly dropped into an unexplained metaphysical gear factory with sparking machinery in every direction crossed the threshold from interestingly weird into genuinely confusing. The sequence had cost serious money to produce, and it ended up on the cutting room floor entirely. In its place came the desert planet, which communicates its otherworldliness immediately without demanding any conceptual framework from a viewer. Catherine O'Hara's performance as Delia Dietz is one of the great comedic supporting turns of the 1980s. Her version of the character is manic delusional, grandiosely self-important, and completely hilarious. She plays a woman who has mistaken her own artistic pretension for genuine talent, and she plays it with total commitment. But O'Hara was not the first choice for the role. Angelica Houston was originally cast as Delia, and she was a completely logical selection. Houston has a natural aristocratic quality, sharp angular features, and a controlled elegance that would have made Delia feel like a genuinely intimidating presence in the Dietz household. She would have brought ice where O'Hara brought fire. But illness forced Houston to withdraw from the production before filming got fully underway, and O'Hara stepped into the role. What happened next changed the entire texture of the character. Instead of controlled sophistication, Delia became theatrical collapse in slow motion. Every choice O'Hara made amplified the character's delusion and absurdity. Her wardrobe choices, her reactions to the Maitlands' haunting attempts, her absolute certainty about her own artistic vision in the face of all evidence to the contrary. Burton recognized quickly that O'Hara's chaotic energy was a better fit for the film's heightened tone than restrained elegance would have been. And if you look at Delia closely, with her extreme fashion choices and theatrical meltdowns and total unawareness of how she reads to other people, you can see the prototype for what Catherine O'Hara would later develop fully in her legendary performance as Moira Rose on Schitt's Creek. While the cameras were rolling on one of the strangest and most visually inventive productions in Warner Brothers history, something considerably quieter and more romantic was developing behind the scenes. Catherine O'Hara met production designer Bo Welch during the making of Beetlejuice, and the two eventually got married in 1992. Welch was the man responsible for transforming the film's New England locations and sets into the aggressively avant-garde visual world that defines the movie. He designed the Dietz family's interior renovation of the Maitland house, which functions as a character in its own right. All those angular sculptures and unsettling modern art installations that look like a design school experiment that escaped containment. O'Hara has joked in interviews that part of what attracted her to Welch was the sheer audacity and creativity of his work on the film. She fell for a man because of his architectural vision and his commitment to making a Connecticut living room look like a contemporary art museum having a breakdown. Tim Burton reportedly noticed the connection forming before either of them acted on it, and nudged Welch toward asking her out. The relationship outlasted the production, the decade, and most Hollywood relationships that formed under far more conventional circumstances. Welch later directed O'Hara in The Cat in the Hat. We lost Catherine O'Hara recently, and the worlds of film, television, and theater are genuinely poorer for it. Finding the right location for Winter River, Connecticut required the production team to comb through New England looking for a town that felt genuinely untouched by the modern world. Most candidates were too polished, too recently developed, or simply too contemporary to sell the quiet, frozen-in-time quality that the story required. The solution came from an unlikely source. A member of the production team spotted a postcard at a gas station rack, the kind sold alongside maple syrup candies and novelty keychains. The image showed a tiny village called East Corinth in Vermont. White church steeple, gentle rolling hills. A main street that looked like several decades of history had quietly agreed to stay and never leave. When the team traveled to Vermont to scout the location in person, they found that the real town matched the postcard almost exactly. No chain stores, no modern intrusions, no visual noise to break the illusion. Local buildings were transformed into the film's fictional locations, with various storefronts and community spaces becoming parts of the movie's visual world. A postcard that cost almost nothing accidentally provided the geographic foundation for a film franchise worth hundreds of millions of dollars. When Tim Burton returned to make the 2024 sequel, he refused to recreate the town on a soundstage despite the significant cost savings that option would have provided. He went back to Vermont. Local residents, who had taken to calling themselves juicers over the years, watched their town transform one more time. Before Netflix became the streaming giant that currently dominates global entertainment, before it became known for producing prestige television and then canceling beloved shows at the exact moment audiences were most invested in them, it was a small startup that mailed DVDs to customers in red envelopes. The company launched in April of 1998 with a library of around 925 titles. The very first disc that Netflix ever shipped to a paying customer was Beetlejuice. Not a deliberate tribute, not a marketing strategy, or a symbolic choice designed to communicate something about the company's identity. A customer selected the film, an employee put the disc in an envelope, and one of the most significant moments in modern entertainment history happened without anyone involved understanding what it meant. In 1998, DVDs were still a novelty worth showing off, and Beetlejuice, with its neon colors and bold visual contrasts, was exactly the kind of film that demonstrated what the format could do for picture quality compared to VHS. Netflix grew from that single red envelope into a company worth hundreds of billions of dollars. When it finally shut down its DVD service in 2023, ending 25 years of mail-order operation, the whole era that began with a moldy bioexorcist in a striped suit came to a close. While Michael Keaton was constructing one of the most memorable performances in 1980 cinema, his co-star Alec Baldwin was going through something considerably more agonizing. Baldwin has been candid in interviews over the years about the fact that he spent much of the Beetlejuice production in a state of genuine existential dread, convinced that his participation in the film was going to be a serious professional setback. Baldwin's core problem was that he did not understand the tone of what they were making. He felt like a piece of furniture in scenes that made no logical sense to him. He compared the experience to serving a prison sentence, which is a remarkable description of what turned out to be a beloved classic. He attempted to pitch a more heightened, campy interpretation of Adam Maitland to Tim Burton, and Burton's response was essentially silence, followed by more sketching. Baldwin was left without direction and without a clear creative framework for his performance. What eventually helped was watching Michael Keaton work. Baldwin later described Keaton as having the precision of a marksman, saying that watching Keaton's total commitment and control gave everyone else on set something to orient around. Here is what Baldwin missed while he was suffering through the production. His confusion was the performance. Adam Maitland is a man who died unexpectedly and is now navigating a bureaucratic afterlife with no instruction manual and no preparation. The bewilderment Baldwin felt in real life translated directly into the authentic quality of his character on screen. The performance he thought was his worst turned out to be exactly what the film needed. The film that Tim Burton originally assembled had a different ending from the one that reached theaters. In the original cut, the story concluded with the Maitlands and the Dietz family reaching their arrangement, the household settling into its uneasy but functional coexistence, and Beetlejuice's fate left deliberately ambiguous. He either remained trapped or simply faded from the story. It was a reasonably clean conclusion. Test audiences were not interested in a clean conclusion. After spending an entire film watching Michael Keaton turn every scene he touched into a controlled explosion, viewers felt genuinely cheated walking out without one final moment of chaos. The feedback was clear enough that Burton made a significant addition. The afterlife waiting room sequence at the end of the film, where Beetlejuice tries to cut the line, flirts aggressively with the caseworker, and has his head shrunk by the witch doctor sitting beside him, was never part of the original screenplay. It was created specifically in response to audience reaction. The shrunken head image became so iconic that it evolved into one of the franchise's defining visual signatures, appearing on merchandise and promotional materials for decades afterward. The Maitlands ending also got adjusted in response to early screenings, with the celebratory dance sequence expanded to make their afterlife feel less somber and more like something worth rooting for. Beetlejuice opened in 1988. The sequel, titled Beetlejuice, finally arrived in theaters in 2024. That is a 36-year gap between the original and its follow-up, which is less a sequel timeline and more an entire human generation. And the development history of that sequel is its own fascinating piece of Hollywood chaos. In the early 1990s, Tim Burton actually commissioned a script called Beetlejuice Goes Hawaiian. The concept placed the Dietz family in Hawaii, where they were attempting to build a resort on top of an ancient burial ground. Beetlejuice would come along for the ride, and at one point would win a surfing competition through supernatural means. A pale, decomposing, mold-covered creature of the underworld shredding tropical waves in full daylight. Burton was genuinely drawn to the tonal collision of dropping his darkest character into the most aggressively cheerful possible setting. But the project never moved forward. Batman Returns pulled Burton and Keaton in different directions. Years accumulated. The cast aged naturally, and the sequel spent decades in various states of development without ever finding the right moment to move. What eventually unlocked it was a combination of nostalgia becoming culturally dominant and the right pieces falling back into alignment. The 2024 film reunited Burton, Keaton, and Winona Ryder, with Catherine O'Hara returning as Delia and Jenna Ortega joining as a new generation character. It crossed $450 million at the worldwide box office. 36 years of waiting, one abandoned surfing script, and the ghost with the most finally came back. The name sounds like pure nonsense, which is part of its charm. But Beetlejuice is actually a phonetic play on Beetlejuice, a massive red supergiant star located on the shoulder of the constellation Orion. It is one of the largest and most luminous stars visible to the naked eye, and it has been the subject of significant astronomical attention for years because it is in an advanced stage of stellar evolution and is considered a strong candidate for an eventual supernova explosion. The connection between the name and the character runs considerably deeper than a clever wordplay choice. In astronomy, Beetlejuice is famously unstable. It pulses irregularly, dims unexpectedly, and brightens again in ways that have kept researchers watching it carefully for signs of what comes next. The movie's Beetlejuice operates on an identical rhythm. He is volatile, unpredictable, and only makes his full presence known under very specific conditions. A dying star and a ghost who haunts the space between worlds, both defined by instability and irregular appearances. In the film itself, the character's name is spelled BTLGUSE on a tombstone and in the afterlife's bureaucratic paperwork. The marketing spelling came from Warner Brothers, concerned that audiences would struggle to pronounce the astronomical original correctly. 35 years of audiences thinking they were dealing with a swamp demon, when the entire time they were looking at a reference to one of the universe's most spectacular dying giants. The script gave Michael Keaton a name, some dialogue, and a premise. Keaton gave it back to Tim Burton as a fully constructed, completely original, deeply strange human being. And the transformation between those two things is the reason the movie works the way it does. The process started before cameras rolled. Keaton turned the role down twice before finally agreeing to take it on. The script as written did not convey the character to him in a way that made sense, and he was not interested in simply performing what was on the page without understanding who he was playing. Once he committed, he went directly into collaboration with the makeup and costume departments and started making choices. The hair needed to look like the result of an electrical accident involving something already deceased. The skin needed layers of texture, suggesting centuries of decomposition carried out in conditions no maintenance crew would ever address. The teeth needed to communicate a relationship with dental hygiene that ended sometime around the era of the printing press. Every physical detail was a deliberate choice. The sandpaper voice was Keaton's invention. The jerky, unpredictable physical movement style was his creation. The famous improvised moment where he wipes his nose and comments that he will save that for later, one of the most quoted bits in the film, was never in the screenplay. Burton gave Keaton significant freedom to improvise once it became clear that what he was generating was consistently better than what the script had anticipated. The result is a performance that does not feel like acting in the traditional sense. It feels like a genuinely chaotic entity that wandered in from somewhere and simply refused to leave. That is not an accident. That is Michael Keaton working at the absolute peak of his creative powers with 17 minutes of screen time and turning it into something that people are still talking about nearly 4 decades later.